30 days ago, I did something that felt almost un-American. I turned off the news completely. Every channel, every app, every notification, every morning headline, every evening broadcast. Cold turkey. Day 1. Done. My wife thought I had lost my mind. My neighbor Frank thought I was becoming irresponsible. My daughter called from Chicago and said, "Dad, how will you know what is happening in the world?" I said, "I am going to find out what happens to me instead." And what happened to me over the next 30 days was so unexpected, so measurable, and so genuinely life-changing that I am sitting here right now telling you about it. Because what I discovered is backed by some of the most compelling neuroscience research I have ever come across. And because I believe with everything in me that millions of Americans over 60 are quietly, unknowingly, allowing the news to do something to their brain that they would never consciously choose if they fully understood what was happening. So let me tell you exactly what happens. Day by day, week by week, inside your brain, your body, your sleep, your relationships, and your overall health when you step away from the news for 30 days. And let me start with something that might genuinely shock you. The average American over 65 watches or consumes news content for an average of 4 hours every single day. For hours, that is more time than most people spend exercising in an entire week. More time than most people spend in meaningful conversation with people they love. More time than most people spend doing anything else that is purely for their own well-being. And here is what those 4 hours says doing to the most important organ in your body. Your brain cannot distinguish between a threat that is happening to you directly and a threat that you are watching on a screen. This is not a metaphor. This is basic neuroscience. When you watch coverage of a disaster, a crime, a political crisis, or any threatening situation, your amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system, activates in almost the same way it would if that threat were physically present in your living room. Your body releases cortisol. Your heart rate increases slightly. Your muscles tighten. Your nervous system shifts into a low-level state of alert. And then the segment ends. And the next threatening story begins. And the cortisol spikes again. And the alarm fires again. And the nervous system stays activated for 4 hours. Every single day. Dr. Graham Davey, a professor of psychology at the University of Sussex in England, has studied the psychological effects of television news consumption for decades. His research shows clearly that negative news content does not just make people feel sad or anxious in the moment. It fundamentally changes the way the brain processes unrelated everyday experiences for hours afterward. It amplifies personal worries that have nothing to do with the news content, and it creates a measurable state of generalized anxiety that most people never connect back to their news consumption because the connection is not obvious. In other words, you watch 60 minutes of evening news and then spend the next several hours feeling vaguely worried, vaguely tense, and vaguely certain that something bad is about to happen, without having any idea why. Does that sound familiar? Now let me tell you about what started changing for me in the first week after I turned it off. Days 1 through 3 were genuinely uncomfortable. I want to be honest with you about that. I felt a strange restlessness, an urge to check, a nagging feeling that I was missing something important, that somewhere out there the world was on fire, and I was the only person not watching it burn. Researchers actually have a name for this feeling. It is called FOMO, the fear of missing out. And it is specifically designed into modern news media. The constant breaking news alerts, the urgent music, the phrase "you need to know about this." All of it is engineered to create a feeling of compulsive, necessary attention, to make you feel that stepping away is irresponsible, dangerous, somehow negligent. That feeling is not an accident. It is a feature. By day 4, something started to shift. I noticed I was waking up differently. Instead of reaching for my phone to check the overnight headlines before my feet hit the floor, I just woke up, and the morning felt different, quieter, more mine, less immediately contaminated by whatever had happened overnight in places I could not control and situations I could not affect. My wife noticed it before I did. She said on day 5, "You seem calmer this morning." I had not said a word about it. She just noticed. Here is what neuroscience says is happening in your brain during the first week of news elimination. Your cortisol baseline begins to drop. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. In healthy amounts, it is essential. It helps you wake up in the morning, manage genuine challenges, and respond to real threats. But chronically elevated cortisol, the kind produced by hours of daily threat-based media consumption, does measurable damage over time. Research published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrine shows that chronically elevated cortisol in adults over 65 accelerates cognitive decline, disrupts sleep architecture, weakens immune function, increases blood pressure, promotes abdominal fat storage, and directly contributes to depression and anxiety. Every single one of those consequences is also listed as a normal effect of aging, which means millions of American seniors are attributing to aging something that is at least partially being driven by their daily news consumption. And that distinction matters enormously, because aging cannot be changed. News consumption can be weak. 2 is where things get genuinely interesting. By days 8 through 14, the research on news detox, which is what researchers actually call it, shows that most people experience a significant and measurable improvement in sleep quality. Sleep and cortisol are directly and powerfully linked. Elevated cortisol in the evening, exactly when most Americans are watching the nightly news, directly suppresses melatonin production. Melatonin is the hormone your brain produces to initiate sleep. When cortisol is high, melatonin is low. When melatonin is low, falling asleep is harder. Staying asleep is harder, and the quality of the sleep you do get is measurably worse. By week 2 of news elimination, cortisol levels have dropped enough that melatonin production begins to normalize. Most people report falling asleep more easily, waking less frequently during the night, and waking in the morning feeling more genuinely rested than they have in years. I experienced this so dramatically that I actually called my doctor to mention it. She was not surprised. She told me she recommends news elimination to patients struggling with insomnia more frequently than almost any other single intervention, more than sleep medication, more than melatonin supplements, more than any specific sleep hygiene technique. Turn off the news. Let me ask you something right now. When was the last time you woke up and your very first thought was something genuinely your own, not related to something you saw on television last night, not a worry borrowed from a headline, not a vague anxiety about something happening somewhere that you cannot control? When was the last time your first thought of the day was actually yours? If you have to think hard to remember, that is important information. Week 3 is when the most profound changes begin to happen. And these are the ones that surprise people the most. By days 15 through 21, most people undergoing news elimination report something that researchers describe as a restoration of present moment awareness. Simply put, your brain starts coming back to where you actually are. Here is what this means practically. When you consume heavy news content daily, your brain spends enormous amounts of processing energy on events happening far away, involving people you do not know, in situations you cannot influence. Your mental attention is constantly being pulled out of your actual life and into a constructed version of the world built specifically to keep you emotionally activated and watching. When that input stops, your brain gradually redirects its attention back to your immediate environment, the people actually in your life, the beauty that is actually around you, the experiences that are actually available to you right now. My friend Margaret, who is 71 and lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, told me about her week 3 experience in a way I have never forgotten. She said, "I was sitting in my garden on a Tuesday afternoon, and I noticed the light on the leaves of my tomato plants, and I realized I had been sitting in that garden for 7 years, and I had never actually looked at it before. Not really. I was always half somewhere else." She was half somewhere else because the news had trained her brain to live there. In crisis, in conflict, in places far from her garden, her tomato plants, and the actual beautiful life she was living. Neuroscientists call this attentional restoration. Research from the University of Michigan shows that it produces measurable improvements in cognitive function, emotional regulation, creativity, and overall life satisfaction in adults who have reduced their consumption of distressing media content. Your brain wants to come home. Give it a chance. Week 4 is where the changes become impossible to ignore. By days 22 through 30, something happens that I can only describe as a fundamental shift in your relationship with worry itself. Here is the mechanism. News consumption creates what psychologists call a negativity bias amplification loop. Your brain already has a natural negativity bias, meaning it pays more attention to threats and bad news than to neutral or positive information. This was enormously useful when we were hunting for food and avoiding predators. It is significantly less useful when we are sitting in a recliner in Phoenix, watching footage of disasters happening 3,000 miles away. Daily news consumption feeds that negativity bias until it is running at full volume all day long. Everything feels more threatening, more uncertain, more out of control. Your brain has been trained to scan for danger constantly, because that is what it has been doing for 4 hours every day for years. By week 4 of news elimination, that loop begins to genuinely quiet, not because the world has become safer, but because your brain has stopped being trained to see everything through the lens of threat. People report feeling lighter, more hopeful, more capable of genuine joy in ordinary moments, less convinced that catastrophe is perpetually imminent. My own experience on day 30 was sitting on my back porch, watching the sun come up over the neighbors' oak trees. The same porch I had sat on almost every morning for years while scrolling through overnight headlines. And for the first time I genuinely cannot tell you how long, I just watched the sunrise. That was it. Nothing else. Just the light changing in the sky, the birds in the trees, and the coffee in my hands, and I felt something I had almost forgotten was still available to me at 68 years old. Peace, real, uncomplicated, present moment peace. Now I know what some of you are thinking. and I want to address it directly. Are you saying I should just ignore what is happening in the world? Are you saying seniors should be uninformed and disconnected from current events? Absolutely not. That is not what I am saying at all. There is a profound difference between being informed and being saturated, between knowing what is happening in the world and spending 4 hours a day marinating in the most alarming version of it that professional content creators can produce. Here is what I do now. Once a day, for 15 minutes, I read a brief news summary. I use a simple news aggregator that gives me headlines and short summaries without autoplay video, without alarming music, and without the emotional manipulation built into broadcast television news. I know what is happening. I am not uninformed. I am simply no longer allowing the delivery mechanism of the news to manage my nervous system for 4 hours a day, 15 minutes of intentional information versus 4 hours of emotional activation. That is the distinction I am drawing, and the difference in how my brain feels, how my body feels, how my sleep feels, and how my actual daily life feels is something I could not have imagined before I experienced it. So here is your 30-day challenge. I am not asking you to permanently eliminate news from your life. I am asking you to try 30 days and pay attention to what happens. Here is the specific plan for the first week. Simply remove news from your morning routine. Do not turn on the television or check news apps before noon. Start your day with coffee, movement, conversation, music, or simply silence. Notice how your mornings feel different. For the second week, eliminate evening news consumption. No news-related updates after 5 in the evening. Notice how your sleep changes for weeks 3 and 4. Replace your usual news time with something that puts you in your actual life rather than pulling you out of it. A walk outside, a phone call with someone you love, a creative project, a book, gardening, cooking a real meal. Anything that keeps your attention in the present moment of your actual lived experience. At the end of 30 days, ask yourself 4 questions. Do I sleep better? Do I feel less anxious? Am I more present with the people in my life? Do I feel more genuine hope about my own daily existence? If the answer to those 4 questions is yes, you will have your answer about what the news has been doing to your brain. My wife told me last week that she wants her own 30 days. She said, watching what happened to me, she realized how much of her daily emotional state she had been unconsciously outsourcing to people on television. She had never met and would never meet. That phrase stopped me. Outsourcing her emotional state to strangers on television. That is exactly what daily news consumption does. It hands your nervous system, your cortisol levels, your sleep quality, your mood, your sense of safety, and your capacity for present moment joy to producers and algorithms and networks whose entire business model depends on keeping you emotionally activated and watching. You worked too hard for this season of your life to spend 4 hours every day letting strangers borrow your peace. Take it back. 30 days. See what happens, and then come tell me in the comments. Are you willing to try this? Have you already reduced your news consumption and noticed changes? Or does the idea of stepping away feel genuinely frightening? I want to hear all of it. I read every single comment, and I respond to as many as I possibly can. Share this video with someone you love, who starts every morning with the news and ends every evening the same way, who seems more anxious and more worried and more convinced that everything is terrible than their actual personal life warrants. This video might be the most useful thing they watch all year. Subscribe to our weekly videos, because every week we have exactly this kind of honest, warm, evidence-based conversation about what is actually affecting your health after 60. The obvious things and the not so obvious ones. Thank you for being here today. Now turn off the news. Just for today, see how the morning feels different. I promise you, it will.